Scientists of Reddit, what happened when your research found the opposite of what your funder wanted? I used to work for an environmental engineering company. We would sometimes do studies of, say, wetland hydrology that would take months, cost a fortune, and end up showing that the client couldn't use the land for what he wanted because it was unquestionably an important part of the wetland hydrology. He would never get a building permit because of the study we just did, that the client paid for. It was usually, "You mean I just spent tens of thousands of dollars to screw up my plans?" Well, yeah, that's kinda how it worked out. Sorry, this sounds somewhat similar to a home inspection. Yeah, I'm interested in this house, so I pay a guy $500 to make sure it isn't a death trap money pit. Maybe the house is shocks and I'm out $500, but at least I'm not on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in a mortgage. My biology professor told a story of how she was sent to do a biological survey for some species of snake. In the middle of winter with snow on the ground, she didn't find any snakes. I started out in the social sciences with a specialization on consumer habits, residential geography and migration within Russia. In 2005-06 I co-authored a paper, as a graduate student, about gaps in the collection of demographic data in Russia leading to significant underreporting of poverty, crime, suicide, drug and alcohol abuse and HIV. I was set to do my PhD and I would need to be in Russia for a year. My visa was pulled and shortly thereafter, a law was passed banning foreign research academics from Russia. Entirety of my academic career was destroyed. Whoa, this is very interesting. Can you share some of your results? What did you do from there? Did you work on anything else? My thesis advisor made me play around with variables until I showed significant results because he viewed insignificant results as failure and wouldn't let people graduate with them. It was extremely unprofessional, and while I still managed to make my thesis ethical and legitimate by changing my topic completely, I could never feel entirely proud of it. I feel you. It sucks when your thesis advisor is a bit overbearing and you don't feel like you have full control over it. I know a lot of people will say something like, "You are paying the money. Just tell them. Be more assertive." But it's not that simple. This is why the p-value needs to take a seat. It's useful, but it's not the end all be all. My funder never really cared about which way the research was going, as long as it was solid. Well, liquid with a pinch of solid, in my case. My thesis returned results showing that my professor's patent pending design would actually cost customers more money. I got acclaim from other departments and people in industry, but never was invited back for more research under that professor. This is stupid. That's exactly how scientific researchers are supposed to work. We went ahead and accepted the results because I'm not an unethical shocks who would be okay with spending years of follow-up research just so we can get paid to poison patients. Nor do I know anyone else who is. If I did, I'd quit. Note also that a lot of time the funder doesn't care what the results are. It grabs headlines when someone has a huge, obvious bias and then things don't get published. But a lot of the time you're just asking a grant for money and the grant don't care as long as you're doing something interesting. How it's supposed to be. I've had this experience a number of times. The most egregious of which, I've posted the story on Reddit before. It's somewhere in my post history if you're curious. The principal investigator messed with the underlying data until he found the right combination of data elements and subjects to get the p-value he wanted to publish. I got my name taken off of that paper, and the paper, which did get published initially, did get errated and removed from the journal's online collection. That seems like more of an issue with academic dishonesty of the pie than the funding source pushing an opinion on you. Most research councils play no role in the decision to publish, and the money is awarded based on your proposal, not the directionality it takes as the results come in. Equally, most funders have no vested interest in your product or drug. Otherwise this is considered a financial conflict of interest and by law, must be stated on all the papers and talks. I've had no issues personally, but some results are more publishable than others, so it can often be disappointing for all parties if this is the case. Relatives who have worked with pharma companies say that at least some of them would rather know this drug is dangerous and doesn't work before it makes it to the market rather than after. No PR fallout that way. Cheaper than a class action suit. 2. As a grad student who abandoned science for sanity, I never cared what the result of an experiment would be. Seriously, it didn't matter either way. Any outcome was technically useful information and a positive outcome was unlikely to begin with. I was more concerned with the experiment working correctly, getting quality data, and getting my professor off my ass. I'm only an undergrad, but I'm working on a project that's piqued the interest of an American association related to the study, and right now the research is suggesting things that wouldn't be beneficial for the association necessarily. Probably still going to publish anyway because science matters. Without going into too much detail, looking at a certain invasive species that was being heralded as basically ecosystem apocalypse. Tons of money was sunk into action plans and programs to rectify the species proliferation. The problem eventually more or less fixed itself. Which part of the country? We published it. We were scientists. Anyone funding science should understand that the data decides the results, not the funding. Basically, the funding is so tight in America that NSF doesn't usually fund anything unless there is significant preliminary data. I'm talking R01s and even R21s now. So you essentially have to do the study before submitting the grant to do the study, to get money to do the study. A trend that's emerging is that people use their current funding to secretly work on the experiments for their next grant. We were funded to find applications of nanotechnology in water treatment. We found a bunch of ways that nanotechnology could not be applied in water treatment, so the opposite of what they were looking for. Third-party contractor here in a scientific field. They get what they get. Maybe they come back, and maybe they don't, but I'm not lying to cover anyone else's ass. Once you go down that road, you are liable for those findings and their validity consequences. I'm pretty thankful to not be under anyone's thumb, and I intend to keep it that way. I looked into migrating from AC-based power systems to DC-based for residential houses, office buildings and greenhouses. I was mainly looking at efficiency gains and reduction in material use. As it turns out, best case scenario in efficiency gains is 4%, and when looking at embodied energy, equals material energy used over the full lifetime of a component system, the gains are marginal too. This was extremely frustrating, because it resulted in the project getting stagnated, and eventually cancelled. Bye bye PhD. I'm just saying. Fantastic question. Most of AskReddit is an endless circle jerk, but this is trying to get at the core of issues people actually care about. It happened to John Lott. As a college professor, he was asked to link the connection between guns and crime. After 20 years of research, he wrote, "More guns, less crime." I'm actually an undergrad in an engineering field, but have participated in one research project involving new casings for electric motors in areas that would be surrounded by the gases and fluids you would typically find in an oil pumping environment. Obviously, the oil company would have loved for their idea to work because they would have made a shocks ton of money. They were happy with our research and glad to know which environments caused failures so they know where to improve the design for the next revision. I work in R&D. We want the honest answer, the actual and objective result. That's why we hire experts to do research for us. If the thing we are thinking of making doesn't work, then we want to know that as soon as possible. It's much better to have a scientist telling you it doesn't work after spending a few $100,000 than to spend a few million and then having the final testing, or the customer, telling you it does not work. Fake positive results doesn't help anyone, at least not in our type of business. You have academic scientists do the research, or contract some kind of company. When I was working at NASA, I was working on evaluating the seams for a vehicle that was being developed. I was doing a test of several materials to show they would up to the stresses seen due to the change in temperature. Every one of my specimens failed. We went back to the drawing board to evaluate candidate materials for the seams. My funding was not renewed, and my paper was buried in some economics journal to languish in some poor future grad student's lit review. Edit for clarification. My funding wasn't renewed because with my findings there was nothing further to look into, not out of some sort of spite. That makes me really sad. You'd think academia would be the one place where humans could power their petty power squabbles aside and focus on furthering our species' collective knowledge. Academics are the same species of primate as the rest of us. They form cliques and develop prejudices and have dominance contests. You'd think they'd be above it, and they certainly do, which seems to make them worse. Why would this be any different? It's politics town. I just spent 3 months researching the optimization of a certain chemical reaction for a known chemical company and it boils down to it didn't work. Too bad. It's not like I am some sort of magician that can magically generate good results. The only real chemical wizards work on the streets. And by the way, chemical wizards could be a good name for a band. I got to investigate the success of rehabilitation of mining sites. I did all fieldworks, lab works and paperworks for the research and found that the biodiversity of the locality have been compromised and it's way too different from the company's success story. Sadly, my research was put on hold. You mean after they blow the tops of mountains and block up the adjacent waterways they can't put it all back together again by planting some grass on top? I do environmental consulting. Basically my office gets put in charge of cleaning up contaminated sites that aren't really hurting anybody, but still need to be resolved. Sometimes our fixes aren't effective. Ever try and get a stain out of concrete? Imagine it's a mile long and 30 featuring deep. Our clients still have the obligation to work on it, so all you can do is go back to the drawing board and ask for more money. Have a friend who published a test finding that new expensive test tubes for a particular fluid had no advantage at all compared to standard, and they were somewhat funded by the company. It was published. Science still has integrity. I think the design of the tube was changed. I work in industry, so the conversation basically goes, well, that blows, but can we sell it? Our measurements do not support light SUSI particles models. Many of our theorist colleagues are baffled, but nothing more. If the world simply doesn't work this way, then this is what we report. No matter how many careers were built on it,